بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم وما بعد. Alhamdulillah, we're going to make a start on the third session, and the third session is from page number 18 in the course handbook, and the title for the beginning of the third session is regarding the death and the demise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he knew more or less after the conquest of Mecca that his time on earth was coming to an end. Verses such as إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحُ وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسَ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ was revealed, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordering Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that after the conquest of Mecca, when you see people in flocks, afwaja, are entering into the deen, then فَسَبِّحْ بِحَمْدِ رَبِّكَ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ, praise your Lord and also seek forgiveness. Similarly, other verses in the Holy Quran, الْيَوْمَ أَكْمَلْتُ لَكُمْ دِينَكُمْ, that today Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has completed your deen for you. Similarly, the year when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, generally what would happen is that Sayyiduna Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam will come in the month of Ramadan, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do one repetition, one taqrar, one repetition of the Holy Quran. But the year when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam did 2 repetitions of the Holy Quran with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So brothers and sisters, all these were signs that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was soon going to leave this particular world. Now after the farewell Hajj, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he fell ill on the last 10 days of Safar. So Rasulullah sallallahu passed away in Rabiul Awwal, and the month before Rabiul Awwal is called Safar. And the last 10 days, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he fell ill. And it's mentioned that once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all of a sudden he woke up at night and he decided to go to Jannatul Baqi, the graveyards of Medina. And he went to the graveyard of Medina and he sought forgiveness for the people of the graveyard, for those who had passed away. And after he returned home, he then fell ill. Now during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's illness, he kept on asking the other wives that when is Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha's turn? Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he passed away, he had 9 wives and each one of them had a turn. The only exception was Sauda bin Anha. She did not have a turn, but the others had a turn to spend the night with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So every day Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would be asking that when is Aisha's turn? So after taking permission from the other wives, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he then spent his last few days, the last few moments on earth in Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha's house. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he passed away on a Monday, and the Monday before, or for 7 days, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha's house. Now during the illness, even though Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was ill, he still made the effort to go to the masjid for every single prayer. So this was the case. Even though he was ill, he would still go to the masjid to perform every single prayer, to lead every single prayer. Now the Thursday before Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death, there is a very famous incident known as the incident of Qirtas. Qirtas literally means paper. And basically what happened was that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was ill, he was lying down. And he said to the companions that bring me a pen and a paper and I want to dictate something to you so that you can write it. So Sayyidina Umar anhu, he saw the difficulty, the taklif Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in, that he said to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, O Prophet of Allah, you don't have to write anything, you don't have to tell us to write something. We have the Quran and the Sunnah in front of us, we have the Quran and your words, that is more than enough. Whereas the other companions were saying that no, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is asking for paper and pen. He wants to write something special, something important. So let's get the pen and paper and let's write down what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is going to tell us. So what happened was that there was an argument, you could say, between some of the companions who were saying that no, let's not get the pen and paper, we've got the Quran and the Hadith, let's not make Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam go through any further pain. Whereas other companions were saying that no, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is asking for pen and paper, let's get it, let's write what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling us. So there was a kind of an argument which led to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to say that, okay, all of you leave. Because sometimes it happens that when people are arguing in front of you, two groups, two sections, you say to all of them, you know what, don't disturb me, all of you leave. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to the companions that, but if you're going to argue and so on, there's no need for you to be here, all of you leave. But whilst they were leaving, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave them 3 nasiha, gave them 3 advice. And the advice are mentioned in Sahih al-Bukhari. One of the advice Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave to them was to expel the Jews and the Christians from the Arabian Peninsula. The second advice Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave was that any delegations, any wufud, any delegations who come, when they are about to leave, then send some gifts with them. Give them some hadiyah, give them something when they are leaving. And the third advice, the rawi, the narrator of the hadith says, I forgot. But then scholars then go on to explain that the third advice Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave was to act upon the Quran or to send Usama bin Zayd al-Anhu's army. There's different opinions. So this happened on the Thursday. Now that very same Thursday, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he went for Salatul Dhuhr to the masjid, to Masjid Nabawi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And after Salatul Dhuhr, he then gave a speech, a sermon. And in this sermon, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said these words. These words can be found in Sahih al-Bukhari. That every prophet, before they leave this world, they are given a choice. They are given a choice of either staying in this world or choosing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I have chosen Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the Sahabas understood that very soon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was going to leave this particular world. So Salatul Dhuhr, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam led. The next prayer, Salatul Asr, he also led that as well. But for Salatul Maghrib, he was unable to lead it because the illness was too much. So he was unable to lead it. So he told Sayyidina Abu Bakr to lead the prayer. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr leading the prayer is a sign, is an indication, a clue that he should be the first Khalifa after my death. Because when we talk about being Imam, when we talk about being a leader, being an imam or a leader doesn't mean just like leading the prayer for Fajr, Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib and Isha, and that's it, you're an imam. Imam means a guide. Imam means, literally being a leader. And I explained earlier the qualities of being a leader. That you enjoy people's happiness. You feel the same sorrow and pain at people's grief. And you sacrifice everything for your flocks and for your people. That is a true definition of being an Amir, of being a leader. So Rasulullah ﷺ was a leader, and by making Abu Bakr leading the prayers in his absence, that in itself was an indication, a clue that who Rasulullah ﷺ wanted to be the first Khalifa, the first leader, the first Imam, the first Amir al-Mu'mineen after his death. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr was leading the prayer. So this happened on the Thursday. Now on the Saturday or Sunday, Usama bin Zayd. Now Usama bin Zayd he is the son of Zayd bin Harisa and Zayd bin Harisa, as the brothers and sisters will know, was Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's adopted son. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in one of his guidelines told the companions that we should send Usama bin Zayd his army to wage war against the Persians and the Romans. So on this Saturday and Sunday, obviously differences of opinion, Usama bin Zayd he came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam ill. He was like very seriously ill. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't want his illness or his sickness or his impending death to be an obstacle in the vision, in the obstacle of propagating the deen. And I'll mention this later, that whatever happens in life, we should not let other issues be an obstacle in our main effort, and that is to spread the message of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So even though Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was literally on his deathbed, he said to Usama bin Zayd that you need to go out with your army, with your men, and you need to leave Medina Munawwara. So Usama bin Zayd he didn't want to leave. He didn't want to leave. Why? Because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was about to pass away. But because it was an order and a command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he didn't have the stomach to leave. But because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told him, he went. So he left Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's house. He left Medina Munawwara, and he stopped over nearby in Medina Munawwara, and he didn't proceed with the journey because he knew that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam any moment soon will pass away. So he didn't want to go too far, because if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did pass away, he would not be able to return back and see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But because it was a command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to leave, he then decided to leave. Now when he left Medina Munawwara on the Sunday, he heard some news that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's illness or sickness was kind of getting severe. So Usama bin Zayd he then turned back with his army. He went back to Medina Munawwara. He saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on his deathbed, about to pass away, very severe in his illness and sickness. He went to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he kissed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on his forehead. And he stayed in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's company. Now the following day, which was on the Monday, the day when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, and sometimes it does happen that the day when people pass away, they actually feel a bit better. That if somebody is going through like a prolonged sickness or illness, what happens is that the moments before they leave this world, they actually feel a bit better. So that was exactly the case with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That on the Monday when he woke up for Fajr, and he was actually feeling a bit better. He even opened the windows and he saw the Sahabas, they were in salah, they were in prayer. And he looked at them and he even smiled at them. And it's mentioned in the hadith of Sayyid Bukhari that the Sahabas were close to being tested. What does that mean? In other words, the Sahabas were so happy and cheerful that, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is getting better, he's probably recuperating, he's getting better, and so on, that they thought, or they were thinking about breaking their salah to go and meet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But obviously they decided that obviously salah is more important, so they continued with the salah. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he looked at the Sahabas, he smiled at them, and then he closed the window, and that was the last time most of the Sahabas saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam alive. Now, because the Sahabas, they saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam waking up in the morning, they even saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam smiling at them, they all got better. They all thought that, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is making a recovery from his illness, he's getting better. So after the Fajr Salah, the Sahabas feeling a bit happy that, actually, they're getting better and so on, they went to their different works. Sayyidina Abu Bakr who led the Fajr prayer, after the Fajr prayer, he came into Sayyidah Aisha's house. He saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he seemed better. So he then decided to visit one of his other wives who lived in the outskirts of Medina. So he then met Sayyidah Aisha, saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he seemed better. He left Medina and he went to the outskirts of Medina to see one of his other wives. Now it was mid-morning on the Monday when all of a sudden Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's illness then came back and it started worsening. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was on his bed. Sayyidah Aisha Danha was next to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When Sayyidah Aisha Anha's brother Abdurrahman bin Abi Bakr anhu came into the apartment and he had a miswak in his hand. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then gestured to Sayyidah Aisha to pass him the miswak. So Aisha then gave the miswak to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Then Aisha asked Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that, shall I chew and soften the miswak for you? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam nodded with his head that yes, do that. Then afterwards, Sayyidah Aisha, she chewed the miswak, made it soft for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, gave it to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam kept on saying, Allahumma fir rafiqil a'la. And what does Allahumma fir rafiqil a'la mean? It means, oh Allah, in the highest of abodes. And that is referring to what I explained just a little earlier, that before death, every Nabi, every Prophet is given a choice of either staying in this world or going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every Nabi is given a choice. For us, a normal, ordinary human being, when we pass away, but there's no choice for us. Angel of death comes, takes our soul, and that's it. But for every prophet, whether it's Musa alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, or Adam alayhi salam, whoever, they've all been given a choice of either staying in this world or meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And obviously a Nabi or a Prophet who is the friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whose mission on earth was just one thing, and that is to spread the deen. So when they have accomplished their mission, there's no need for them to remain in this world. There's no need for them to basically stay in this world where there's no benefit or no meaning behind it. This world, as mentioned in the hadith of Sahih Muslim, that is something which is worthless in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why in the hadith of Sahih Muslim, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said that if this world had any value, and that value, if it had a value equivalent to the wing of a fly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not have given a kafir or a disbeliever any water to drink. What I'm trying to explain is that this dunya is totally worthless. So obviously Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was on or in this world, He was there for a purpose. He was there for a mission. And when that mission was accomplished, there was no need for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to stay in this world. So he goes on to explain that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam kept on saying, Allahumma fi rafiqil a'la, O Allah, in the highest of companions. And while saying this particular dua, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam looked to the heavens. And whilst he was looking to the heavens, and he was doing miswak, and he was reciting this particular dua, the miswak then dropped from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's hand, and it fell to the floor, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, whilst his head was in between Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha's laps and her chest. So in other words, he passed away in Hazrat Aisha radiallahu anha's hands, whilst Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's head was between Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha's lap, i.e. thighs, and her chest. So this was how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away. And as I was explaining to you brothers earlier, that we talk about calamity, we talk about difficulties, we talk about musibat, but just spare a moment for the difficulty the Sahabas were going through. Spare a moment that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam single-handedly changed their lives. Their life of sins, guna, darkness, whatever they were involved in, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, by the affection, by his motivation, by his dedication, by his zeal, it transformed the Sahabas from living like evil people, living like animals, into greatest of beings. And that guide, i.e. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that person who guided them through all the difficulties in life, who was there for support, that person had now just left their life. So you can imagine how distraught and how sad and how sorrow the Sahabas must have been at that particular moment in life. And that's why I mentioned that the greatest calamity to befall the Muslim Ummah is the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And even great people like Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, and Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, you read from, and inshallah when we do the next course on Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, you read like he was so straightforward, he was so blunt, he was so on the ball. No one could like mess around with Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu. But even a great personality like Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu was dumbfounded at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death. That's how much of an effect Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death had on Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu. Even to the extent that Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu was saying things like, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has two lives in this world. Hazrat Umar was saying that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has two lives in this world. Now anyone in their right state of mind will never say like somebody's got two lives in this world. You only have one life in this world. And when you leave this world, that's it, there's no coming back. But even Hazrat Umar radiallahu anhu, because he was so dumbfounded, he was so taken aback, he was so shocked, he was overcome by calamity. And obviously people who go through difficulties will also testify as well that when you go through difficulties, family, other kind of issues, then what happens is that for weeks and weeks you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what's happening. You're not eating properly, and you're not thinking properly, you make rash decisions, you don't know what on earth you're doing. And this exactly was the situation of the Sahabas. Literally they were all dumbfounded, they were all shocked, stunned. Some of them fell unconscious, they didn't know what they were doing. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, so blunt, so straightforward, so on the ball, he was also dumbfounded at the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, except one Sahaba, except one companion, and that was Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And subhanAllah, when Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when he heard of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's death, he came back, he went straight to Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha's apartment, and he saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His body was covered with a sheet. He removed the sheet, the cover, and he kissed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on his forehead. Thereafterwards, Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he went to the masjid, and he then gave a speech. He then gave a sermon. And one of the verses Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu mentioned in the sermon was وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. Subhanallah. That Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is not except a Rasul and a messenger. قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. And many messengers have come before him. In other words, everyone, every messenger, every Nabi, every Rasul, at the end of the day, they are human beings. They are bashar. And what does that mean? It means that, like every other human being on earth, they also will have to taste death as well. كُلُّ نَفْسٍ ذَائِقَةُ الْمَوْتِ. So many messengers have come. Musa alayhi salam, Ibrahim alayhi salam, Ismail alayhi salam. But after they completed their mission and they accomplished what they have come to this world for, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took them away. So Abu Bakr anhu reminded all the Sahabas that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was a messenger at the end of the day, and those who worshipped Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then indeed he has passed away. But those who worship Allah, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala subhanallah is hayyun la yamut, is alive and he never passes away. So when Abu Bakr anhu gave these comforting words to the Sahabas, only then the Sahabas, they realized that, oh, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we were living in so much luxuries that we forgot to realize that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam one day, like our other colleagues, like our other companions, will also leave this world as well. So only then the Sahaba subhanAllah, they kind of realized. Even Hazrat Umar at that point, he would even say that when Sayyidina Abu Bakr anhu recited that verse, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِ الرُّسُلِ, it felt as though that the ayat was just revealed now. It felt as though that we forgot this ayat completely. Because sometimes it happens that even though there may be brothers here who have memorized the Quran or who understand the Quran well, but sometimes there may be some kind of oversight of certain verses. You didn't realize, oh, it's in the Quran, or certain hadiths. So exactly here that because the Sahabas were all dumbfounded and taken aback and shocked at what happened, that this ayat, that وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ, they completely forgot all about it. And when Sayyidina Abu Bakr anhu was reciting it in his sermon and speech, they only realized that, oh, this is a verse of the Quran, this is a verse and this is something which was inevitable, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like you and I, like every other human being on earth, will one day leave this particular world. Now after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, again they did his tajheez and takfeen, they shrouded his body, did the coffin for his body. Thereafterwards there was an ikhtilaf, there was some differences amongst the Sahabas as to where should we bury Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr anhu, and he's the only person, so he's the only narrator of this hadith. He then narrates that I heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that wherever a Nabi or a Prophet passes away, he is buried in that particular spot. He is buried in that particular place. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr anhu, remember, he's the only one to narrate this hadith, indicating further that look how close he was to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that even certain things about where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam should be buried, other Sahabas like Ibn Umar, Ibn Abbas, Abu Hurairah, who are well known to narrate hadiths, they weren't aware of this hadith. Only Abu Bakr anhu was aware of this hadith. So he then narrates that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that wherever a Nabi passes away, he will be buried in that place where he passed away. So then they removed the bed or the bistar or the mattress where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sleeping on, and then they dug a grave, and then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was buried inside. And unlike other janazas or the janazas which we pray here, where you have the imam and everyone is behind the imam and we pray salatul janazah, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's janazah was slightly different. Different in terms of people were praying his janazah in groups. So a group of people would come, they will pray janazah, and then that group will go. Another group will come, they will pray janazah, and then they will go, and so on and so forth. So there wasn't a particular imam to lead the janazah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. People individually were coming in groups of 10s, 20s, to the extent that in total, as mentioned in the books of Seerah, 30,000 Sahabas. 30,000 Sahabas in total, they came. Because remember, you need to realize that at that time, Islam had spread, to a lot of places. All of Arabia was now under Muslim control. They were all Muslims. So they all came and they prayed Salatul Janazah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and thereafter Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was buried. Now, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was buried, obviously he passed away in the morning. It was mid-morning when he passed away. So he was buried, say, after Dhuhr. Now, as soon as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was buried, and this is like another point which I will come to later on as well. The Sahabas, they then decided to choose the first Khalifa. They said, let's get together and let's choose on the first Khalifa of Islam. And the point which I want to mention is that deen, or even like say organizations or masajids, should be based in such a way that it's not dependent on one person. It's not dependent that when that person passes away, then everything collapses. So that's the point which I want to mention. And it's very important for imams, for teachers as well. Because one thing which is inevitable in this world is death. So it's very important that when you are teaching, when you are imam, at the same time, you're also training other people to take over you when you pass away. It shouldn't be such that, you leave this world today and that's it, that organization just totally falls to its knees. It can't cope because everyone depended on you. No, you shouldn't. And being a leader, you shouldn't make it such as well. Sometimes, people they won't blame the person, they blame others, or why didn't you step up? But actually, sometimes what could happen is that the students, they want to step up, but the teacher or the imam doesn't allow them to step up. He just wants his power. So that's also wrong as well. So even imams and these types of people, leaders, ulama, shuyukhs, they should kind of train their students or their people or their disciples in such a way that when they leave, then they can take over. And it shouldn't be such that you've got total control of that thing, that when you do leave this world, and that's it, everything collapses. Because as I said before at the very beginning, the main thing isn't to promote your organization. The main thing isn't to promote the masjid or whatever. The main thing is to promote Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam's deen. So whether you do it or whether you can't do it, or when you leave this world, you then get somebody else to do it for you. So that's something which is very important. And another point I want to mention here is that where something like this happens, the aim or the purpose of our creation, the purpose, i.e. to spread the deen of Allah and His Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, should never be forgotten. So look, the Sahaba, they were just going through the greatest of calamity. They were going through the greatest of shocks. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away in the morning. After Dhuhr, they are burying him, but by Maghrib, they are deciding on the next Khalifa. So it's not like, let's just, have a mourning period for 3 days or 40 days. Let's have a mourning period for a year, and then we think about the next Khalifa. No. As soon as Rasulullah passed away, the Sahabas knew the importance of appointing a Khalifa so that the Islamic government or state doesn't kind of disintegrate. So straight away on that very same day, few hours after burying Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were doing mashwara about who to make the first Khalifa of Islam. And this in itself is telling us that, anything could happen in life. Bereavements, difficulties, musibat, calamities, whatever. Whatever happens, but the aim and the focus, i.e. da'wah, propagating, teaching, whatever it may be, that should still continue. So it should not be such that, okay, you're going through a difficulty, so just because you're going through a difficulty doesn't mean that you should cancel all the duroos and all the lectures you do. No, tell somebody else to do it in your place. So what I'm trying to say is that just because you're going through difficulty doesn't mean that you cancel everything. And this is exactly the same way with regards to Sahabas. When they went through difficulties, when, like in this case here, Rasulullah passed away, they didn't stop and think, oh, let's mourn for a period of time, but instead they got themselves, motivated again, and they then sat down and they were thinking who should be the next Khalifa and who should be the first Khalifa after Rasulullah's death. Now moving on to the next page, page number 20. Abu Bakr anhu being chosen as the first Khalifa. Now what happened was the Sahabas, in particular Hazrat Abu Bakr, Hazrat Umar anhu, and many of the Muhajiroons and Ansars, they gathered at a place called Saqifa Bani Sa'ida. Bani Sa'ida, Sin Alif Ain, Bani Sa'ida. So Saqifa Bani Sa'ida. So they gathered at that particular place. It's like a house which was where one of the Ansars would live. So they gathered there. And they were discussing about who should be the first Khalifa of Islam. So some nominations were made, such as so-and-so should be the first Khalifa. The Ansars were saying that let's have one Khalifa from the Ansar and one leader from the Muhajiroons. So obviously that's never going to work. You can't have two leaders because they're just going to have civil war and civil fights between them. So that's not going to work. So that obviously, that suggestion was totally, rejected. Then some of the Ansar were saying, well, let the Khalifa be from us then. Let us, one of our people, i.e. the people of Medina, let one of them be the Khalifa. So again, Abu Bakr anhu and the Muhajiroons, they rejected. And they rejected on the basis that it is mentioned in a hadith, a very famous hadith from Bukhari, Sahih Muslim and so on, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has said, Al-a'immatu min Quraysh, that the leaders are from the Quraysh, which means that the Khalifa of Islam, the Amirul Mu'mineen, he can only be from the Quraysh. Now, let me just explain this particular hadith. What does it mean by the leaders can only be from the Quraysh? It means that where you have people who are worthy of being leaders, and in terms of taqwa and piety, in terms of ilm and knowledge, they're the same. So we will then ask ourselves, who out of the two is from the Quraysh? And whosoever is from the tribe or the clan of Quraysh, he will be made the imam, he will be made the leader. Look, it's similar to a ruling which I'm sure you've studied before in fiqh of salah, that who is the most worthy of leading the prayer. So there's quite a few factors. So you're going to explain that if they are all knowledgeable, this is according to the Hanafi fiqh, that if they are all knowledgeable, then the one who knows how to read the Quran properly should be given preference. But if they are all equal in knowledge and in recitation, then the one who is the most pious should be given preference in being the imam, in leading the prayer. If they are all equal in piety, then the one who is the eldest. These are certain factors which we apply to choose who should be the imam, who should lead the prayer. So exactly regarding this hadith as well, it's telling us that if the main thing when it comes to being an Amirul Mu'mineen, a leader, is obviously taqwa and piety. And that's always will be the case in Islam. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. the one who is the most pious, the one who has the most taqwa, he will be the imam. He will be the most closest in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So similarly, regarding this particular hadith, what does it mean by the leader should be from the Quraysh? It means here that if you have 2-3 nominations, 2-3 candidates of being the Amir al-Mu'mineen, and all of them in terms of taqwa, piety, ilm, knowledge are the same, then the one who is from the Quraysh should be given preference. The one who is from the Quraysh should be made the imam and should be made the leader. So Abu Bakr he said to the Ansar that, look, you can't have someone from your tribe to be the leader of the believers, because Rasulullah has said, Al-A'immatu min Quraysh. So after this hadith was recited to them, then they backed down on their nomination that we want someone, or suggestion that we want someone from our tribe to be the leader. Then afterwards, Abu Bakr then suggested that I choose Hazrat Umar to be the Khalifa. This is what Abu Bakr said. I choose Umar to be the Khalifa. And subhanallah, this was the tawazu of our pious predecessors, the tawazu, the humility of the Sahabas, of the earlier Salaf. They would never nominate themselves. They would never ever nominate themselves. They would say, I'm the best person. They would never ever do that. It would always be, make him the Amir, make him the leader. He's the more better than me. They would never ever nominate themselves. And this also mentioned a hadith as well, that when it comes to duties or responsibilities, it's always good not to nominate yourself. Yep. And it's mentioned a hadith that those who desire for leadership, those who nominate themselves for duties or responsibilities, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's unseen help will not come to them. But those, say for example, who didn't nominate themselves, but they were told to take that responsibility. So you didn't nominate yourself to take responsibility of this mosque, but somebody elected you, somebody chose you, that we want Brother Abdullah to, say for example, lead the mosque or be the imam, whatever. So where you didn't forcefully take power, but you were told to be the leader or the imam or the amir, then in that situation you will see that there will be more help and more guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as I was saying, that Abu Bakr like the earlier Salaf, they would never nominate themselves for leadership. So he's suggesting, Umar should be the first Khalifa. But Umar again, he didn't want to nominate himself. So he said, you know what, I think Abu Bakr should be the first Khalifa of Islam. And then he's mentioned some of his fazilats and virtues. It's mentioned, if you look at the course book on page 22 now, like some of the virtues that he was with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the cave, in his absence, i.e. in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam absence, Sayyidina Abu Bakr would lead the prayer. And not only that, so many hadiths about the virtues of Abu Bakr, so many hadiths such as, every time, whatever Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would go, wherever he will be, he will always be, Ana wa Abu Bakr I and Abu Bakr. So because of these virtues and these factors, what happened was that Umar suggested that Abu Bakr should be the first Khalifa of Islam. He then did bay'ah, so he was the first person to hold his hand, take the pledge of allegiance that you are the first Khalifa of Islam. Then afterwards, everyone one by one took the pledge of allegiance and they accepted Sayyidina Abu Bakr to be the first Khalifa of Islam. Now in this particular paragraph, you'll find that there was this issue about Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu. So inshallah, when we do the course regarding Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, I'll mention this in a bit more detail. But obviously some Shias in particular, they kind of say that Sayyidina Ali wasn't happy, he didn't do bay'ah with Abu Bakr and so on. Now it is true that Sayyidina Ali at that moment when everybody else was doing bay'ah, he didn't do bay'ah. But later on he did bay'ah with Sayyidina Abu Bakr. And the reason why he didn't do bay'ah straight away was two reasons. Number one, this meeting which took place between Abu Bakr Umar and other Muhajirun Sahabas and the Ansar, it wasn't a pre-planned meeting. It wasn't something like agreed before. It was like something which wasn't planned. The main Sahabas, they just were passing by, they went to this house of the Ansar and they were discussing the issue. So it wasn't pre-planned, that's number one. And the second reason is because, again, brothers and sisters will know that after Rasulullah ﷺ passed away, his daughter, Sayyidina Ali whose wife, Sayyidah Fatima she fell ill. And for approximately 6 months, she was ill. And Sayyidina Ali was nursing Fatima and it was 6 months after Rasulullah ﷺ's death, Sayyidah Fatima also left this world as well. So during, you can imagine, obviously, sometimes, when your parents even are ill or wives are ill and if they're seriously ill, or husbands are they seriously ill, it's like you forget about everything, like khilafat issues, other issues going to be in the back of your mind, won't you? You think more about your family at that particular moment in time. So this is what happened with Sayyidina Ali he was busy nursing Sayyidah Fatima. So what is kind of mentioned by Shia people or in Shia traditions or sources as to, Hazrat Ali was angry with Abu Bakr, that's why he didn't do the bay'ah straight away, that's why, later on he did the bay'ah out of force. These are all nonsense, it's all untrue. The reasons, as I already mentioned, but as I said, when we do the Ali course, I'll mention a bit more detail. The main reasons were, number one, this meeting wasn't pre-planned, and number two, which was the main reason, was that during that time, his wife, Sayyidah Fatima was also ill as well, and he was more busy nursing and looking after her, and obviously Khilafah, these kind of issues, was the last thing on his mind. Now I just want to mention a couple of things about, obviously, Khilafat, and also a couple of more things regarding Abu Bakr anhu's Khilafat in particular. Now there are many hadiths, but obviously there are two main sources we kind of have evidence from hadiths which I'll give, which indicates towards Abu Bakr as Abu Bakr being the rightful first Khalifa of Islam. And there's a very famous hadith which can be found in Sahih Muslim, that just before Rasulullah ﷺ passed away, a woman came to Rasulullah ﷺ. And this woman said to Rasulullah ﷺ that, O Prophet of Allah, just say if I come back afterwards and you're not here, you're not alive, what should I do? Who should I go to? So Rasulullah ﷺ responded by saying that if I'm not here or if I'm not alive, then go to Abu Bakr anhu. That's a very strong indication that Abu Bakr anhu was the choice of Rasulullah ﷺ. So he wanted Abu Bakr anhu to be the first Khalifa of Islam. And also number two, like we already mentioned, leading the prayer in Rasulullah ﷺ's absence. And also there's another hadith in one of the final sermons Rasulullah ﷺ gave. He said that leave all the windows closed, or close all the windows except the window of Abu Bakr anhu. Or in another tradition it says that have all the doors closed except the door of Abu Bakr anhu. So all this indicating that Abu Bakr anhu should have been is the first Khalifa, or should be the first Khalifa after Rasulullah's death and demise. Now there may be some of you brothers, even sisters, thinking that why didn't Rasulullah make it clear? You're probably thinking that, well, he would have definitely wouldn't have been a Shia-Sunni probably conflict if Abdullah made it clear. Somebody may argue regarding that. So why didn't Rasulullah literally make it clear that Abu Bakr anhu should be the first Khalifa? Now there's a few reasons why he didn't do that. Number one, the first wisdom behind that was so that Rasulullah didn't want to establish a sunnah. Didn't want to establish a sunnah. And what sunnah which Rasulullah didn't want to establish, if say for argument's sake Rasulullah said, okay, after my death make Abu Bakr anhu the Khalifa, then that would have been a sunnah. Then what would that have meant is that every Khalifa, before he passes away, he has to nominate someone. Now, in theory, there's nothing wrong with it. But as you know, that rule can be manipulated, can be taken advantage. So there could be like a tyrant king. So before he passes away, he'll make his son the Khalifa. Yep, that will happen. And that was the case with Muawiyah in a way. Muawiyah anhu, that he nominated his son Yazid to be the Khalifa. So it could be manipulated in the wrong way. So because of that reason, Rasulullah did not choose someone specifically. Because if he had done it, khalas, it would have been a sunnah now. So every Khalifa before he passes away would have had to nominate someone. And sometimes, as you know, that during Sakarat al-Maut, during the pangs, the throes of death, you probably say something weird. So it could be something like, you come out with some next name, whatever, so you're passing away, and then you mention some cartoon, whatever, that he should be the next Khalifa or something like that, or some films, whatever, Brad Pitt or something like that, so you mention his name. So is he going to be the next Khalifa of Islam? I'm just giving you an example. So what I'm trying to say is that, people during the pangs of death, they may say some weird stuff, and obviously that would then mean that person becomes the next Khalifa of Islam. So Rasulullah didn't want to establish a sunnah, hence he didn't choose someone directly. That's number one. And the second reason, and this subhanAllah is this was the practice of Rasulullah and we could learn so much things from here, is that Rasulullah built the Sahabas and the companions up in such a way that the Sahabas, they use their own intellect. Subhanallah. And this is what we do with students in madrasa, that we don't spoon feed the students everything. We make sure that they build their own kind of understanding of Quran and Hadith. Because we can't spoon feed the students every single bits of information, because then what happens when they get spoon fed, then they themselves, when they graduate, they won't be able to understand the text for themselves. They'll just be relying on the teacher. So similarly, even though Rasulullah was the greatest of teachers, that's what it means, he was the greatest of teachers. Yeah, he gave them information. It wasn't like he starved them of information. He gave them information, but at the same time, he wanted the Sahabas to use their intellect to derive who should be the first Khalifa. So in other words, Rasulullah during his lifetime, he gave points, he gave clues, he gave indications that who should be the first Khalifa. Now he didn't say clearly. The reason why is that he wanted the Sahabas to work it out. Okay, I've given you all the clues. Who do you think he is then? So obviously the clues I've given, the hadiths I've narrated to you, all of you. So that is indicating that Abu Bakr should be the first Khalifa. So again, there's many hikmat, wisdom why Rasulullah did that. Obviously, I said not to establish a sunnah. Number two was so that the Sahabas used their own judgment, their own reasoning to derive who should be the first Khalifa of Islam. There's other reasons as well, but these are the main two. Obviously, we look at during Sayyidina Umar ibn Anhu's time, during his Khilafah, he was different. He was actually, he actually chose and nominated someone. So we look at it there why he did that for. But Rasulullah did not want to cause any more further tension, and he didn't want to basically choose a particular Khalifa, but rather he wanted the Sahabas to get together, unite on this issue, and choose a Khalifa who they want. So that was one issue. And the next point which I was going to mention very quickly was just about this Khilafah, or this term which we hear a lot. Khalifa means the leader, and then Khilafat is what we call the system. And obviously I don't want to go too into detail, because obviously it's not the moment to go into in detail. But obviously it's a way, if that makes sense, of running a system, a legal system. Khilafat is the way of running a legal system, an Islamic legal system. And what does Khilafat mean? What is the basis of Khilafat? Khilafat is where there's an Amir or a leader. He doesn't have to be nominated, so he'll be chosen by the main people of the Shura. We look at this during Sayyidina Umar how he established a Shura, a committee, and they then chose the Khalifa. Khalifa is someone who should be based on taqwa, so he's pious, so he can't be someone who's a sinner or a fasiq or a transgressor. But there's another point about Khilafat which I want to mention, and that is, obviously you could write this particular verse down later on. It's verse 55 and 56 of Surah Nur. And basically, subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us how we, i.e. as Muslims, can achieve Khilafat on earth. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us this system of Khilafat on earth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains that the way you will achieve it is يَعْبُدُونَنِي لَا يُشْرِكُونَ بِي شَيْئًا, that you don't ascribe partners with Allah. And then the next verse goes on to explain وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ, that you observe salah, you give zakat, you obey the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now what I'm trying to explain, brothers, is that there are people nowadays that talk about Khilafat Allah, but when you look at their actions and their a'mals, there's no kind of traits of Khilafat on them. What I mean by that is, look, Allah quite clearly says, وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ. Salah, zakat, and number 3, obey the Rasul in the Sunnah. Now what I'm trying to say is that if you want Khilafat, just to cut it short, if you want Khilafat, you need to firstly rectify yourselves. Allah will only give the Khilafat and these kind of things when we ourselves are rectified, when our deen and our own personal mu'amalats are good. That's when Allah will give us these things. But the problem is that we look at Muslims all over the world, not just in the UK, all over the world. It's sometimes very sad, but there are even people like non-Muslims, they will say that I don't like dealing with Muslims. Muslims, they always deceive, they trick, they lie, they never keep their word. These are the traits which non-Muslims recognize Muslims with. That we are liars, we deceive, we never keep our word, we never on time. These are things associated with Muslims nowadays. We lie, we never keep our word, we break promises. Now if we were to make our mu'amalats good, if we were to make our actions and our deen and our spirituality and our taqwa good, then obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us Khilafat. Allah will give us لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. Allah will give us Khilafat on earth. But when we ourselves are not practicing, when we ourselves are the worst of people, how on earth are you going to expect to receive Khilafat or anything from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So that's what I'm trying to say. I don't want to go into too detail because obviously the topic is about Abu Bakr anhu. But these are a few points to remember about Sayyidina Abu Bakr anhu's Khilafat, and also the things which needs to be implemented for Khilafat to be given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.